Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros digital event on CRM fundamentals. Really excited to be diving into this today with Tyler. Before we jump into this, though, we're going to give folks just a few minutes to get settled in here. And Tyler, RFPs as a solution engineer, I'm sure you dream about them at times. But one of the things that we were talking about before we hopped on here was just RFPs in general. Are you in RFP season right now, or is that at a different point in time and year for you at All Cloud?
So we work with lots of different verticals. So RFP season is sort of all year for us. It just sort of depends on their revenue cycle and when budgeting season is. So we get them kind of throughout the year.
Yeah. Never. Sometimes it's fun when they're streaky, and then other times it's just like, oh man, my goodness, I can't. I don't want to look at another RFP for forever.
It certainly makes it easier to fill out the same question 3 times in a row versus one each month. So not as much fun, but definitely easier.
Yeah, not quite as fun as CRM fundamentals. See what we did there?
I really set you up for that one, and that was not on purpose. But
yeah, no, it's so good. It's like we've been prepping for this for forever and a day.
Yes.
Really excited to have Tyler here, and I'm going to jump in with just say a few words about Modern Sales Pros here. So Tyler, if you advance us one slide, please. For those of you who are maybe new or this is your first event, welcome. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are folks that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. We have about 20,000 members in our community and growing, and we help create an environment for our community members where they can answer other questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. So just like today, we're going to be talking about CRM fundamentals. There's also a very robust online discussion board where you can keep this conversation growing. And, we do a number of different programs like this throughout the course of the month. And today we're really pumped to have Tyler joining us from All Cloud to talk about CRM fundamentals. For those of you who aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards. And with that, hand it over to Tyler to say just a few words about All Cloud.
Sure, yeah. So All Cloud, we are a platinum consulting partner for Salesforce. So we are everything Salesforce, from the core sales service community, keep going on all the various products that go in there, marketing as well. So we also have a very large AWS practice. So we have some very interesting synergies that happen between Salesforce and AWS. But I am very firmly seated in the Salesforce side of things, and very happy to be so as well.
Excellent. And we're pumped to be working with Tyler here today. Before we jump into this and before Tyler can introduce himself, just wanted to say a few words about how we came up with the programming for today's session. Everyone who's registered had a chance to submit some questions. Tyler and I had a good brainstorming session about what we thought was interesting. We looked at what was being discussed in the Modern Sales Pros community. We put that all in a pot. And what we'll go through today are the common themes that came up and the common questions. So Tyler will be talking both at a high level general best practices first principles, and also diving into some of the specifics, some specific things. We've got a whole section around automation. Tyler's going to talk for a little bit about data governance. We're going to be talking about epic wins and horror stories. So for those of you who are here live, feel free to submit questions using the question and answer panel. In that panel, you're able to upvote and add comments to questions. So if somebody asks a great question, just say, hey man, that's a great question. Give it an upvote, thumbs up. That's going to help Tyler and I figure out exactly which of all the amazing questions that we're going to answer. And the first question that's always asked, when will the recording be available? It'll be available shortly after it's done with Zoom post-processing. So it's about 24 hours from now, you'll be able to relive all of this amazingness. But enough about sort of the housekeeping notes. Tyler Holmes, this is your second event with MSP, but love for you to introduce yourself for folks who may not know you.
Sure, yeah. So I've had kind of an interesting career path up to now. So I started off my career actually working for a creative agency. So I'm in Portland, Oregon, where we are renowned at the moment for having the world's worst air. Not always something that you want to be known for. So if you can see sort of, I don't know if you can or not, the lovely towel that I have covering over my fireplace, we're trying to keep the smoke out up here. So started a creative agency, very focused on email. This creative agency was. We were at the time a reseller of ExactTarget back when that was a thing. So I supported a lot of different email service providers, not only from a sales standpoint, but strategy, automation, working with clients, getting their campaigns off the ground. Ran a performance marketing division there for a couple years, doing Google Analytics and just general sort of performance reporting things, but very much focused in the email world. So that's kind of where I got started in Salesforce, but at the time it wasn't. It was ExactTarget. They hadn't been purchased yet. We did a lot of B2C stuff there. So that's kind of where I got my feet wet. And then the first real consulting gig that I moved on to was working for a company called Blue Wolf, doing enterprise-wide B2B consulting, primarily in the marketing space, but also kind of getting into the core of Salesforce itself. After that, I thought that rather than just telling brands how to do things, that I should probably have a little bit of background in actually doing some of the things that I was asking these brands to do. So I moved on to running a few brands both from a marketing perspective as a marketing director, as well as a director of revenue operations for a few companies. And did that. Realized that, hey, some of the things that I was telling these people was actually a lot harder than I thought it was. So it gave me kind of a unique perspective on coming back into the consulting world where I am today with All Cloud. So kind of been, on all sides of the ball. I've run marketing teams, I've run sales teams, I've run service teams, and like I said, both from an actual practitioner standpoint, as well as from a consulting standpoint. So that's been my journey. It's been a little over 10 years now in the Salesforce side of things, but along the way with customer, running on a brand side, I've worked with HubSpot, I've worked with all manners of different marketing automation tools, kind of you name it. I've worked with the tools that were given to me or that I inherited. So have a fairly broad and unique perspective on kind of CRM and the different pieces that plug into it in general.
Well, and I think one of the parts that's exciting, Tyler, about having you on and talking about this today is you've actually lived it from a bunch of different angles, whether you were the owner of the CRM in a revenue operations capacity, a consumer of the infrastructure from a marketing standpoint, or somebody who's now really consulting on how to get Salesforce set up most effectively. So really excited to have your perspective here today. And I think let's just jump into it. And again, a reminder for all of our attendees, please do use the question and answer panel. That's going to help Tyler share as much of his expertise. We've got a bunch of great questions and sort of topic areas lined up. And let's just get started, Tyler. Like, why is this so freaking hard to get right? Like, what are some of the best practices that you've seen or you've accumulated over kind of the course of your decade plus that can really help folks get set up for success?
Yeah. Let me advance the slide here so I know what I'm talking about. So how do I build a CRM from day one? So I think one of the things that I come across quite often is just, at this point, everybody feels like they need a CRM from day one. Which, in some cases that's true. But I also work with a lot of companies that they're massive companies, 15 to $500 million annual revenue global companies that have made it that far with no CRM. I'm always kind of continually surprised when I go in and talk to some of these companies. I'm like, wait a second, we're implementing a CRM? We're not going into your CRM and fixing something. Oh, okay, all right, let's do this. So start by kind of the first step here is start by knowing what problems you're trying to solve. What are the reasons that you actually need a CRM? Using and maintaining a CRM is a commitment. So make sure that the problems you're solving are going to be worth it for you. I've too many times, you go into a CRM and you look at it and you're like, I don't think anybody's actually touched this thing, and you've been paying for it. And like, all right, well, so know what problems you're trying to solve first, and write them down. So the next step would be, to document them, and not just your problems, but your process. Like, how do you make money? How do your teams work on a day-to-day basis? So what's that process that people are going to follow when you give them a tool to be able to do some of those things that they're already doing? Most likely they're already doing these things in a spreadsheet, on a post-it note, whatever that it is that they do. You got to have these processes for them to follow, because CRM without process it's going to be garbage if you don't have a process for users to follow. If you don't know how to create process, because we run into that with clients as well. Clients that you would recognize their name, that hey, I have this VP of sales. You're a pretty large company. What's your process? And you kind of wait. There is no process, which is fine. It's where an SI like us comes in, right? We've seen not only lots of different customers and lots of different prospects and how they do it, but most of us have done this on a day-to-day basis. So we can help on that side of things. I tell my clients that it's my job to be their translator. A lot of the people that we work with, whether it's Salesforce or something else, obviously at All Cloud it's Salesforce. I want to know how you want to run your business, and then we can build the systems and the processes to make that vision a reality. Just tell me what your challenges are, how your business works, what's important to know about it, what questions you want to ask out of the CRM, and we can make you more efficient doing the things that you are doing today. I think a lot of the hurdles kind of jumping into a CRM that you come across with users in particular, and if you're an established company with an established sales team, they may be hesitant to jump into something that's going to be different for them. And so it's really important to think through, not making their day-to-day lives harder. It's going to be different for sure, but not making them harder. So I know that's kind of a generic answer to this question. So let me maybe give a little bit more specifics here. So start with the basics, especially if you're new. Don't try and boil the ocean with a new implementation. It's 200 times harder to unravel a mess than to kind of methodically build out a system. I know it doesn't necessarily feel right if you're going to spend money to build out a CRM and not all of the things that you eventually want are there. But trust me, I liken it to moving into a new house, or building a new house. Sure, you can go in and you can do all the decorating and all the other work that comes with a new house starting on day one. Or if you live in it a bit, you start to know what's going to work for your house and how you want to live in it, and how your family, aka your salespeople, your service people, your whoever else is going to be in this thing, how they want to live in it and what's going to work for you. There's less rework. You're not paying for a new couch because you bought a red couch on the day you moved in and it really isn't what you wanted or what you needed. So get the big questions right when you do this. So keeping with this house analogy, which I'm probably going to beat to death, how many rooms do you need, right? That's a pretty big question when you're building a house. Excuse me. There we go. So same thinking, kind of a big question around this house is, know if you plan on using leads, for example, right? We all have probably at this point heard, the leads issue. Are you going to use leads? Are you not going to use leads? That's a pretty big question to answer, that should be answered before you get in. Leads have been in Salesforce and other systems from the beginning, but they also cause a lot of problems. In general, I don't like leads, but it takes a lot more work to get to a point where you don't have to use them, because you have to build the architecture and the reporting and all of the things that you need to do to be able to make that type of an architecture work. But it is a million times easier to do that in the beginning than if you're backtracking. Trust me, I've done both. So, start with the basics, get the big questions answered. I love clients that want to just, quote, stand it up and then move into kind of this evolutionary mindset. It's cheaper, it's more efficient, it's usually more successful because you're not asking your people to change this just massive change overnight. They get to kind of live in the house a little bit and maybe have some decisions about what the drapes look like, or whatever color of the rooms. I'm going to move away from this analogy in a minute here, but
I think it's
yeah.
I think it's it's very practical, and I think especially if we zoom out a little bit beyond just the CRM, but it's the same thing in CRM today. There is no shortage of sophisticated tools, solutions, apps, consultants, widget makers, vaporware, books that you can consume. It's literally infinite and ever growing in terms of there's a tool for the exact problem that you have, and there's a great marketer out there that's going to make sure it shows up in your LinkedIn feed. And I really want to echo Tyler's point as a strong first principle for any technology investment, doubly so for the CRM because it is so foundational, of just think about your business. What are the processes that run that business, and where is the CRM going to help? Yes, and Tyler, I'm really glad that you shared that point. If there's some big companies that you've worked with who don't have a fully featured every widget under the sun of Salesforce turned on with automation and validation rules till the cows come home. And I think that's an important lesson to take, that you can build and grow and scale a very successful business. And I bet that they probably have very sound processes, but maybe don't have necessarily the technology component behind it. And I think one
Usually
of
they
the
do have fairly sound processes, but yeah, I mean, I think for anybody who gets into kind of the consulting world, one of the first things that you sort of realize is that, hey, these big brands are just like us. They all are working on getting better. So at some point you look at it and it's disappointing when you see some of these brands and you see what's sort of behind the curtains. But at the same time, it's a little bit comforting as well to know that that it's sort of like those celebrity mags. That's like, celebrities, they're just like us. They're picking up their groceries. So don't feel bad about where you are in your evolution. Just keep moving towards where you want to be, and you don't have to, like I said, boil the whole ocean right away. One of the other
and
things that I see people kind of fall into a trap when they're setting up a CRM is just, when you have something like this, when you didn't have it before, the world is your oyster as far as just things that you can report on and, stuff that you can put into it. And so really kind of coming to terms with what do you want to report on, not what you're capable of reporting on. This is the what do you want your business to tell you kind of section. They're two very different things. So, for example, you may think you want a 19-step opportunity process because it's going to give you that very granular look at everything that's going on in your business. But obviously that's going to cause problems for your users. It's convoluted. But being laser focused on the critical few KPIs that you need, coming out of the gate, that's going to help you improve your business is really important. I haven't ever worked for a company that, standing up a new CRM and they've got a data science team that's ready and raring to get going on the data that's coming out of this CRM. It's usually me and a couple other people. So be realistic about what you're going to be able to consume, and you're going to be better off from that standpoint. You'll get better data. out of your users, and you'll get better data to continue to scale your company.
I think that's an important part, and that's actually the first theme that we're going to double click into here. Lots of questions came in. We even got a live question right now around, hey, how do you dedupe, right? I think getting into data governance is a great first place, because if we think most of us have inherited a CRM in some way, shape, or form, we don't usually stand it up from scratch. So now, cool, I've got it. How the heck do I keep this thing running like a lean, mean fighting machine?
Yeah. So sort of the one of the main things is just standardize as much as possible. Use pick lists where you can. The only thing worse though than a free text field is a multi-pick list field. If I can't think, every time somebody asks me this question, I try and think of like a good reason to have a multi-pick list field, and I can't think of one. But I've come into orgs where it's crazy. You'll have a multi-pick list field on the account and a standard pick list field on the opportunity, and then somehow you're supposed to get the data into, it just does not work. If you want to have some fun, look up multi-pick list and Salesforce, and you'll get all kinds of fun titles around just how much they're hated in the industry. So standardize as much as possible. Use pick list fields. Make sure that you have a strategy for managing duplicates, meaning who can create records, which records can they create. If you're an established B2B company, you may have a good portion of your account universe accounted for lack of a better term. So make a request queue for an admin to manage any additions that a user thinks that need to be made, so that you can catch dupes before they kind of happen. I love it's the 1-10-100 rule. It takes $1 to I don't remember where this came from. It takes $1 to verify a record when you get it, $10 to clean it later, and $100 if you do nothing. So that might help you get some budget for some tools. But just stopping it before it starts is a lot cheaper and easier, obviously, than trying to figure it out later. And I think we've all come into orgs where you got to do that. So some of the tools that are out there that we run across quite often, is Cloudingo, which is probably my favorite company name ever. Ringlead, Demand Tools, they all kind of do a very similar thing. Some of them are more full-featured, some of them are a little bit more user-friendly. But you can't go into a tool, and this is a theme throughout all of CRM, without a process. Because if you don't stop them before they start, you're just going to continue to have the same problem. So you really work through that first. I think too many times I walk into companies that just, everybody can create everything, which works maybe for a little while, but you really have to kind of lock down on who can create what, why can they create it, and really have a handle on where the data is coming from. As far as how to get consistency across the teams in process adherence, idiot-proof the machine. That might be a little crass, but use validation rules, for example. So some common ones that anytime I come into an org that I use is, don't allow stages in an opportunity process to be moved backwards. You may need to do it at some point, but make sure that people can't just move from stage to stage willy-nilly. If you have that 19-stage opportunity process, it's going to be pretty worthless if people can go from 1 to 18 in half a second. So make sure that there's ways that they can move the stages forward. Make sure that you're not allowing them to move a stage forward until they've completed all the information that you want them to complete. Don't allow opportunities to be reopened when they're closed. You may want to open one later up on that's been closed, or maybe someone closes one accidentally, but in general, you're going to get a lot better data out of not allowing those things to be done. Don't allow a closed loss deal or a closed won deal. Don't allow it to happen until you have the details of how it happened. So much important information comes out of a closed won or a closed loss deal, obviously, that multiple teams are needing. So having, a validation rule around that and making sure that that's getting filled out appropriately. Don't make it a multi-pick list field, like I said. Make it a priority as well. A lot of sales teams meet multiple times during the week, but use a clean your room or I call it a dash of shame, that you review regularly with the team. Things like deals with outdated close dates, deals without contact roles, all of these things that cause your data to start to get really bad. Make it a priority. What else here as far as process adherence? I mean, use the tools that your CRM gives you. So, if you want somebody to follow the opportunity process, give them the documentation to be able to follow that process, and don't allow them to deviate from the process. So really kind of box them in when it comes to that, but don't over engineer it. I've seen, deal rooms, for example, that have, take somebody 45 minutes to fill out a deal room before they can move to the next stage. If it's important, okay. I've never come into something like that where that information is used. So what it ends up doing is just people resent it and try and find every which way to not do it. So you get people that just put not applicable in all of them and move on. And if you don't catch it because you're not using it, it's worthless. So you really have to kind of box them in, idiot-proof the machine, like I said, and make sure that you're keeping those processes sound just through the use of the technology that you have.
Really important point that I want to double click on that Tyler mentioned in here. And I know we got some sales leaders on the call and some ops people on the call. There's a level of discomfort everybody should feel around the amount of data that's either required to be input or available in the CRM. There's a healthy equilibrium that I think, and Tyler, you'll tell me if I'm wrong on this, that you should put to, right? You want the AEs to have to work a little bit to put the necessary information to run the business and close the opportunity, et cetera, in Salesforce. And you want the ops people to feel like, oh, well, if we could only get one more thing. And as long as everyone justifies everything, and you remember at the end of the day, you've got an AE or an account manager who's trying to bring revenue into the business, that is not there to just enter data. It's an important first principle to keep in mind with this, of that like healthy equilibrium or healthy tension between those organizations or groups.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to sales, right, like what do you want them to be doing? Do you want them to be inputting data into the CRM, or do you want them going out and talking to prospects and making them customers and bringing in money, right? So there is that healthy balance, right? Like you need to know what they're doing to bring that revenue in, so you can populate, bring that out to the rest of the sales team and to improve what you're doing from a business standpoint. But you also want to give them time to be able to make those phone calls and those emails and do all those things that you need them to do. So data governance is such an interesting and topic, but I think one of the other things is to talk about tools, not even from a data governance standpoint, but just tools in general. This question about, is there an easier way to make Salesforce work better, or any CRM tool work better? Like I said, I started my career at a creative agency supporting technology that underpinned our campaigns. I've used tons of tools. They all suck in their own way. So regardless of what the tool is designed to do, there are multiple tools that are out there that you're going to have to review to do that. You have to figure out, or have someone like AllCloud help you figure out what you can live with. I'm obviously biased when it comes to Salesforce, but I've managed, like I said, companies with HubSpot, Pipedrive, just the marketing automation tool. You can make it work, but I do believe that you reach a point at which you need something more powerful. So thinking about your roadmap for efficient integrations is just knowing what type of a company you are and what you sell influences the tools that you're going to need. So stick to standard configuration of whatever tool that you're using today until it's no longer possible to do the things that you want to do. Sticking to standard configurations means that the tools that you're going to buy later on that are designed to integrate with the tools that you're already using will most likely work properly. So, you know, the blessing and the curse of tools like Salesforce is that there's 30 different ways to accomplish every task, but there usually is a generally accepted way of doing something. So take some time to Google how others have done something, because as a developer friend of mine told me one time, it's kind of stuck with me, if you Google something and someone hasn't answered that question yet, you're either brilliant and may have discovered something worth millions, or you have a typo in whatever you searched for. I'm always continually amazed by questions that I pose, and somebody's had that answer prior. You know, so understanding, are you B2B or B2C? It's kind of a pretty easy question to answer, but I've seen B2B companies selling with B2C tools, and the data model breaks down at some point. Or you Frankenstein it so much that nothing else is going to work with it later on as you grow. So, you know, be very particular about the types of tools that you're thinking about, just based on the type of company that you are. You know, if you're selling widgets, at some point you're probably going to need an ERP, right? So to think about that. If you're selling SaaS, at some point you're going to need a subscription management tool. So something like CPQ, which is probably one of the worst named tools out there. So we have Cloudingo, which is probably my favorite. CPQ, on the other hand, amazing tool, but you would never know that it's a subscription management tool, and it does it very well. So, you know, kind of know what you're going to need, which seems obvious, but I've seen it too many times where people just, you know, they use whatever tool that's out there, or they're trying to boil the ocean and they find things that just they don't integrate, or they don't work well together. So when you're thinking about buying and the best practices for buying new tools, and I think we talked about this a little bit the last time I was on, is, and again, coming back to this, know what problem you're trying to solve. Tools can solve symptoms, or tools can solve the actual problem. Do you really need a duplicate management tool, going back to data governance, or do you need to change your process? A good tool on top of zero process will not solve your problems and probably will make them worse. The other thing is just a tool doesn't run itself. So buying a tool usually doesn't solve the problem. So ask yourself if you have the time and the money and the resources and the patience to make that tool work forever. Shameless plug for MSP. There are a ton of people on MSP that have made lots of tool decisions. I can almost guarantee that someone has made the same error you are about to make, so learn from their mistakes, and everybody is super helpful. So if you haven't posed a question in the forum or used it, it's really helpful, and everybody is really willing to pitch in and answer those questions from people. You know, don't fall victim to pride. We're all ops people. We're all people that have probably done this for a while. We're all smart, but we're not all knowing. So don't be afraid to ask what you maybe think is a dumb question, or ask for help. It's probably not all that dumb anyway, and might save you a lot of money and problems.
And I think one
made,
point to add on that too,
yeah, go ahead.
Tyler, just it's also the exercise of thinking about the question that you're really asking is in and of itself informative to you, right? Back to your point, am I buying a tool to address a symptom of a problem? Am I buying a tool to address a problem? Am I buying a tool in search of a process in search of a problem? Like, spending some time thinking about the question that you're looking to the answer for, because it's oftentimes more complex than do I use Zora, CPQ, or Cloudinga, or other, right? It's
Yep.
oftentimes way more complex than that. It's not just a or B. So
Yeah.
even going through that exercise is a valuable thing when you think about buying and purchasing and getting new tools in the stack.
Yeah. And when you think about it, I mean, tools are expensive, obviously. So making the right decision, even if it costs you a little bit of money on the upfront, you know, so whether it's bringing in an all cloud or someone like us to help you answer that question, because we've answered that question a lot, especially, you know, the Zora CPQ, you know, which tool is it? You know, those are not cheap endeavors for anybody to go on, even if you're trying to do it yourself. So spending a little bit money up front is usually preferable to making a pretty massive blunder later on. Usually ends up being a lot more expensive. Automation. This was another one that I think a lot of people have questions on. The best practices for CRM task automation, I think the best advice I can give is start with your users. Find out what annoys them, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's who we all work for. If you're an ops person or you're an admin or anything, I mean, at the end of the day, you're working for your users. So find out what annoys them. What do they do 1,000,000 times a day, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to solve world peace with your automations. One of the ones that I talked about the last time that we were on was just, automating a LinkedIn search, right? So pulling a few fields from your CRM, putting it into a URL string that searches LinkedIn and keep them from having to type the information that they've already typed into the CRM and take them to where they want to go. Whether you're an inside salesperson or an AE, you live on LinkedIn a lot. That's something that you do on a day-to-day basis. So, if you're saving even just a second, let's just call it a second, right? And you do that 100 times a day, it's 100 seconds a day times 365 days. I don't know what the math is there. It's a significant amount of time. So, start with your users, find out what annoys them, and start small. Like I said, buy this book. If you're on Salesforce, I really like this book. You can see that there's a lot of different, I don't know if you can actually see me, but it's called Lightning Sales Ops, Building Salesforce for Sales Development Teams. It's one of the few books that I've found that actually tells you exactly how to do something. So even if you know nothing about Salesforce, you could literally build the things that they talk about in here. I almost guarantee that you could find something that's going to work for. There's some things that are really interesting that I've never even thought about that just are kind of fun to think about and adapt for your company. But beyond that, as far as from an automation standpoint, from a process and how to do it, please test. We'll get into the blunders in a little while, and I've done my fair share of production cowboying in my day, and thank goodness I've never caused a complete meltdown. But if you have a sandbox, use it. I know it takes longer. I know that your boss wanted it yesterday, but if you break something or your users can't work till you fix something, it's a lot more expensive, and your boss is probably going to be a lot pissed off at you than if it just took a little bit longer. Make sure you document things. I know these are all kind of basic things, but we all forget to do that type of stuff. Use the description fields so that people understand what the fields are for. Like I said, we're all very smart people, but I would venture to guess that every single one of us on this call can't hold the entire history of every change we've ever made in our org in our head. So make sure that you're documenting. Back up everything before you make a change. If you don't have a backup tool, which there are lots of them that are out there that are really good, because surprisingly, one thing that Salesforce is really bad at, which people don't realize, is backing things up. If you have some terrible event that happens, trying to get a backup from Salesforce, if you haven't done it before, is literally impossible. So think about that beforehand, and do some research on some tools. They're not expensive, and they do a great job. When you do roll out on automation, it's surprising. It's kind of like an invasive species that you wouldn't think would cause just like havoc out in the real world. You move something into production and it just doesn't behave the way that you think it's going to. That happens. So don't just turn it on and then walk away and give yourself a pat on the back. Make sure that you have a plan for validating things and that it's doing what you think it's going to do. The last one, I think, for best practices, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think I've worked for software companies that, because they have a group of engineers that are super smart people, obviously, and have built stuff, that they should just build stuff for CRM. there are reasons that software companies exist. That slide that we looked at earlier about all of us that worked and are part of MSP, where there's all these great software companies, there are a reason that all those software companies exist. It's because they solve problems a lot of people, and they usually do it better than someone building it from scratch. I know that we're all special snowflakes, and you maybe, like I said, have an army of developers that are ready and willing to build it. But ask yourself if you're willing to support it for the rest of your career, and if you're willing to let Salesforce or let whatever platform that you're thinking about building the CRM on, if you're willing to let them control what your data is going to look like. If they just suddenly decide that however you built your special snowflake software that's built on top of it, you're going to have to change it, and that costs money and it costs time. And so I'm a big believer in buy not build usually. So just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I think there's a lesson on top of that too that I've heard before, especially with building your own solution. You can never ever get enough of a solution that almost solves your problem. And that's what a lot of home built software is. Like, it's always just one iteration away from solving Tyler's exact problem, and just with a little bit more manpower, we're going to get there. And I think that that's an important lesson with the build versus buy. And it certainly is a conversation that comes up on MSP quite a bit too. There are very good reasons to build some of this, and there are very good reasons to buy some of it. But just building it because you've got an army of engineers, maybe, but maybe there's a company out there that's raised $150 million to solve that exact problem. And that's all they do. They don't do whatever your core business is. So it's a good, I love that point, Tyler.
Yeah, I won't get into some of the funny stories that I've had, but yeah, it's kind of incredible what some people think that they're going to build that's already been built. And it's cheaper usually in the long run. So tips and tricks for making teams more efficient. First sort of tip and trick, which I've already mentioned before, is just go talk to these people. They'll have a million ideas for you to noodle over. And that's the fun part anyway, right? Like finding problems to fix or finding things to do, like the actual research and doing that, like that's usually not the fun part for at least for people like me who like to build stuff. The fun part is like is being presented with problems and then being able to solve them for people, and then giving you a pat on the back, right? So go talk to people. They're going to have a million ideas, because the other thing is they're not going to come to you. I can't tell you how many times as an ops leader I've gone to go talk to someone, and it's been a while, or we've been busy and I haven't been able to do it, and I go talk to an inside sales leader or an actual inside salesperson, and they tell me all these problems, and I'm like, wow, I thought everything was going great. Now I feel like an idiot. I feel like I haven't been doing my job, and I feel like you hate me. And they're like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm like, no, you literally can't do your job. Why did you not come to me and tell me that this is going on? We can't tell, we can't see everything that's going on by just looking at the data, right? So go talk to these people. That's the first trick. For an inside sales team, if you have an inside sales team, they need data. It costs money, but you can either pay them to go find the data, or you can pay them to call people. Which do you want, right? It's your choice. They should be doing research. So even when they have that data, so if you go out and you get a Zoom Info or a Discover Org, and yes, I realize that they're the same company now, but I can't get away from that. It's going to cost you money, obviously, but that data is going to have to come from somewhere. So either you're paying your people or paying a contractor to go out and find that data, or you're going to pay a company to integrate with to enhance your data, because otherwise, you're not going to be able to do your job. Like I said, you can do all sorts of things to try and make that part of their life easier. So start there, because that's the majority of what inside salespeople do. They're on the phone and they're doing research. So, don't make them log their calls. Automate that part of it, right? Don't make them log their emails. Don't make them log their meetings. Don't make them log their tasks. Like, the integration to LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is, it's an expensive tool, but a lot of companies have it. I see it a lot. I've had it a lot in my career. That integration, you can even log your in-mails and log your connect requests directly into Salesforce. Nobody has to touch anything, and you get this really awesome report on the back end of who's doing LinkedIn prospecting the best, which it's always been sort of this black box. But for the last, I don't know, it's been a year maybe, you can see that data and you can pull that into Salesforce now, and get a much better picture about what your team is doing on a day-to-day basis, and find out which AE is doing it well, which AE is doing it not so well, figure out best practices. Like I said, it's an expensive tool. Figure out who's even using it. So, automate the things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So if you're using Outlook Exchange, that's a little bit more difficult. But if you're on G Suite or Office 365, this really should be one of the first things that you do to make those teams more efficient. One of my favorites it's sort of a pet peeve of mine is opportunity naming standardization. Don't let your AEs or whoever creates your opportunities name their opportunities. Come up with a standardized naming convention and automate that. Whether that be the region and the company name and the vertical, or whatever that might be. Think about the things that you are constantly asking questions about. If you can just see that information on the opportunity in a related list rather than having to click in and figure out where the fields are, just think about how much time that saves you on a day-to-day basis. I see a live question here. Have you used cleaning software for duplicates? Maybe these are old. These old, Richard? Sorry, I've been focused in on asking.
The duplicates one came in at the start of the automation chunk, and the other one actually just came in. So they're both really good questions for you, Tyler.
All right. So have you used cleaning software for duplicates? Yes. Those ones that I mentioned before, Cloudingo, Ringlead, and Demand Tools, I've used them all. Those are kind of some of the ones that come up the most. They work really well, but again, you have to have your process down. So one of the big wins that I was going to talk about in a second here, if we have time, was being able to set up. At the time, I was using Cloudingo because that's what I had. Being able to get down to less than 1% of our records were duplicates. That was a huge win for us, but that took time, right? So there's a lot of manual cleaning. There's a lot of kind of just spreadsheet work before you even get into being able to use a tool. Because if you don't know where the duplicates are coming from, they're just going to keep coming. The tool's going to clean them, but you're probably going to lose data. You're going to have issues. So you really have to get down to the bottom of what your problem is first, and then move on to using a tool. The other live question, let's see. In regards to building out lead scoring, would you recommend building workflows to aggregate scoring for demographic info within Salesforce, or leave that to the marketing automation system and transfer lead info across platforms? So that's kind of, that's a question that comes up quite often, right? And it's more of a, I think, as I'm understanding this, it's a, what platform is the master for when it comes to for data. The marketing automation tools, that's what they're built for, right? Is being able to score leads, and whether we're talking about engagement scoring or we're talking about more demographic scoring, that's a big piece of what they were built for. So in general, I like to use the automation tools for people. So having a good idea of what does a good quote unquote lead look like that needs some help from the sales team to move along. I like to use the marketing automation tools. When it comes to companies, I think you can do the same thing with automation for companies that you can for leads, right? So building out workflows and things to update scores on accounts within Salesforce as your team updates those are just as valid. So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, and it's always a process to continue to revamp that, because I think as ops people, it's like we want to get the right answer the first time, but there's no way to get lead scoring right the first time. It's going to be terrible probably the first time in some respects, right? So yeah. I think
That's
I
good.
got
And
all
Tyler,
those
yeah,
ones. Yeah.
I wanna just do a time check here. We're gonna
Yeah.
go for about 5 minutes on kind of epic wins, and then we'll give folks
Sure.
some time to throw some more questions in. So folks, we're rounded in. We're in the home stretch here. So just keep the questions coming in. Tyler's going to share just a little bit, just a couple times he's seen this all hanging together really, really well, and a couple times when he's seen it maybe not work quite as well, and the epic wins and epic fails.
Maybe I'll stick to the epic fails because we all like to sort of know that we're not alone. We've all had failures. So some of these are mine. Some of these are other people that I've either come into or heard about. But one of mine from a data governance standpoint. So horror story there is, I walked into an org where my predecessor, for some reason, didn't believe in lead management, apparently. And I came in and there were 12,000 leads, I think, just in the last 6 months alone that were in a queue called lead queue, with no way that I could find that they could ever get out. So, and this was in an industry that was very expensive. So those 12,000 leads were probably, off the top of my head, worth almost $250,000 that were just sitting in there that nobody had touched. Obviously a problem, and more of a problem was that the marketing leader didn't know that that was happening. So that was probably my data governance massive horror story. Now we did fix that, but that was eye-opening. From a tools perspective, horror story. Enrichment tools, like I said, you want to have your teams to have this data. So enrichment tools are oftentimes invaluable, but again, you have to make sure that you're setting them up right. I've heard more horror stories with enrichment tools than I care to remember, but one of the ones was just, something to keep in mind with any integration is that nothing is real time. As much as anybody likes to tell you that something is real time, even tools that are built by Salesforce that are integrated with Salesforce tools have significant lag in some cases. And not everything comes over at the same time. So you might have part of the, whatever you're syncing over come over, and then, kind of piece by piece, some of these other pieces of data comes into the fields. Make sure that you're accounting for that when you want a tool like an enrichment tool to fill in blanks for you. So I had a client that was using a tool like this, and unknowingly, the lead source field that should have only really been controlled by the marketing automation tool in general was not being filled in immediately as the leads sync down into Salesforce. And the enrichment tool was doing, exactly what it was designed to do, was filling it in. Obviously, I don't, to this day, I don't really know why it was filling in or kind of how it was filling it in, because it really shouldn't have had any data to be able to fill that lead source tool in, but it was. So obviously being able to come up with any kind of ROI calculation was going to be impossible, and it had been happening for close to 9 months as far as we could tell. So know which system is going to be the database of record for fields, because you can have multiple, especially when it comes to enrichment tools. So I would never recommend the enrichment tool as filling out the lead source field. Turn that off. But that's one of my tools horror stories. Let's see. One last horror story that's mine, I suppose, and I think this is one probably that a lot of people have done. But I've done this several times, but I've accidentally sent off thousands of assignment notifications to my salespeople when I am moving things around during territory changes, and I just forgot to turn off email notifications. You're working late and you just forgot to do the little things. So I did it with an automation, and it wasn't an import, so not terrible, but definitely annoying. How are we doing, Richard? Do we want to go to questions, or
Great.
you want me to?
Yeah,
I can
let's
talk about a
go.
couple wins.
No, let's hop over. Let's hop over to questions. And there's a couple good ones that I've got for you here, Tyler. So the first one, and we touched on this a little bit, but I like it because it's a good encapsulation of what we can learn from today. Early stage companies that maybe have a bad CRM in place do have an opportunity to completely reboot, right? They have an opportunity to start over. If you have such an opportunity, how do you learn from what went off the rails before? What are some best practices that you would recommend to say, hey, you have an opportunity to learn from this? Like, what would you say to somebody in that situation?
I mean, it's kind of comes down to what we talked about in the beginning, right? Is know your process, and a lot of times the people that we come in, because this happens quite a bit, right? It's this decision of, hey, are we going to go get a new Salesforce org, or are we going to fix the one that we have today? And so, you know, that question kind of comes down to just how bad is it and how much of the old org you want to keep versus how much of it is just garbage, right? But know your processes. So a lot of times, though, the reason that this happened is because the business has changed so many different times over the years that the stuff that they built, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago is just not valid, and whether nobody took the time to document it at the time, so nobody knows how to turn it off. Sometimes it just comes down to that, is like there's so many nested things that are happening that you worry about turning something off that's going to just, like, you know, blow up essentially. You know, so having some documentation, like I said, understanding of where you want to go and have that documented, you know, is super important as you come into this, and start small, right? At least, you know, you have to get the MVP stuff, the stuff that's going to work. But you know, if you don't have that stuff from the start and you're constantly changing as you're building out whatever this new awesome new platform is, at worst you're going to cost yourself a lot more money, or at best you're going to cost yourself a lot more money. At worst, you're going to be in the same boat that you started with. So you know, really sit down and think about and document all those types of things that, you know, you want it to do from a business standpoint. And if you need an SI like All Cloud to do that for you, we're happy to, and we do that quite regularly. Or if you're going to implement it yourself, like, you know, really sit down and be good with your process before you start to build. Building an airplane while flying it is not the easiest thing to do.
Just a little bit tricky, I would think.
Yeah.
All right, last question. You hit on it a little bit before, but we can't really talk about Salesforce without talking about contacts versus leads. You mentioned before, now I want to ask this specific question. You
Okay.
mentioned before, you can actually build out a contact or a lead-centric model. It just requires a lot of planning and forethought. For
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's looking to build out a contact-centric model, what are some things that they should keep in mind when going down on that journey?
Yeah. So the big one is just, you know, closed loop reporting and being able to, you know, because your marketing team is going to want to understand, you know, we'll call them leads. I'm air quoting here, right? But, you know, it doesn't have to be the Salesforce object, the lead, right? So it's just it's a lead, the concept of the lead. You know, we need to give our marketing team feedback of what's working and what's not. So we need to make sure that we're accounting for that. You know, so understanding that a lot of these tools for ROI and you know, attribution management, they do work off of the standard lead object. They need that feedback for those things to work. So, you know, just going, you know, never creating a lead is not often an option. So creating a way for a lead to be auto-converted and making sure that all of that data that comes in with the lead is being pushed into the contact, that's kind of key number one. You know, there's no concept of contact routing within Salesforce itself. So understanding how are we going to get this lead auto-converted, and then we want to make sure that the contact is getting to the right account. We want to make sure that the contact is owned by the right person, right? So you kind of have to take this step by step and really think out, okay, it needs to go here now. And this is literally the process. And I was going to give a big plug. One of the tools that I really love, and this was one of my epic wins, is a company called Lean Data. You know, lead management, contact management, account management, and the movement of those types of objects is not always easy. Lean Data, I love Lean Data. If you want something that's going to make you really more efficient
as a single admin or in a very small company. That would be one that I would recommend. You know, you have to be able to make sure that sort of that data flows from lead to opportunity and beyond, to be able to make that kind of a model work. Now, there are huge benefits to moving to just a account and contact type model, right? I mean, leads literally just sit off in their own database somewhere, and they don't really have a concept of anything else that's within Salesforce. So, you know, knowing that if you have leads and you have a bunch of leads that are sitting over here, and let's just say that they're all associated with an account, you really don't know that they're doing anything until you convert them to an account. So giving your team that understanding that, hey, you've got 10 contacts that are doing a bunch of research on the site on your account, it's a lot easier from an account and contact, you know, based model than it is from a lead based model to kind of give them that heads up. Otherwise, you're kind of trying to make them read the tea leaves. So I'm a big fan of that model. It just takes a lot of work to get there because Salesforce was not designed to do that from the start, and most tools weren't.
Oh, I think that that's phenomenal perspective, and I think that that's probably where the contact versus lead debates is a better conversation, maybe for over drinks with a bunch of practitioners here. Tyler, we're at time. This was awesome. On behalf of all of the folks in attendance today, the 20,000 members of Modern Sales Pros, I know you're incredibly busy. And so thank you so much for sharing your time and perspective with us here today and walking us through some really great CRM fundamentals and some really cool stories about the hows and whys of you've kind of come up with your own philosophy on these things. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
And for everybody, stay safe, and the recording will be available in about 24 hours. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.